Okay, Mr. Waldron, this involves the incident that took place approximately 7 a.m. This morning.
Central Dispatch.
Yeah, this is Bob Waldron. It's 4649 Sylvan Lake Drive.
Okay.
Now, I am Hamlet.
Okay, I've already got one en route.
Okay, my wife is. She just tried to burn the house down and shot herself.
Okay, how severe is it?
I think she's down, baby.
Okay.
The first story was that he got the gun
The
from her.
first story he told me that he got the gun, and he indicated to me at the time that when he got the gun the first time, it wasn't even loaded. That she got the gun after that and went out and loaded it. He's walking around down there in the yard, and he's just kicking dirt and walking and goddamning her this and goddamn her that. And God, I said, Elton, for crying out loud, that woman is laying in there dying.
Did he ever tell you or make any representation where she got shot?
When I first got there, I asked him before I went up and looked, and he said, right there.
You know, you're pointing at me with your hand and finger. You know,
At the center of her forehead is what he...
now, did he point or did he just say it was the center of the forehead?
No, he pointed with his hand.
And he pointed to the center of her forehead.
Mm-hmm. But then he also says to me, if she makes it, she's sure gonna have one fucked up face.
By now we know there are all kinds of murders committed in more ways than most of us care to think about. But there's one thing that shows up in every single one. The lie. Whether it's a lie to cover up, a lie to distance yourself, a lie to mitigate, or a lie you tell yourself to make it through the day. The lie always saunters in right behind murder, and more often than not, it brings a few friends. Some people are better at it than others, but nothing betrays a lie like the body. Your body knows no matter what's coming out of your mouth. You see, liars try to fashion a story around what they know can be proven. But getting that story across, without betraying the lie, is often obvious in the tics and twitches of muscle memory that indicate when someone is stretching the truth. Behavioral experts tell us there are plenty of tells to look out for when people might be lying, and it depends on context and setting. But being under the stress of a lie, the person telling it might do a number of things. Maybe they pause or clear their throat before answering a question. Maybe their breathing changes or they quickly change their head position. Or there's a verbal-nonverbal disconnect like nodding when saying no. Researchers tell us that the musculature of the face is so complex. There are some muscles you can't control in the absence of real emotion. The bigger the lie, the harder it'll be to match it with the appropriate expression. Also, the aim of a liar is to convince rather than convey, as an honest person does, and that sometimes means that they repeat themselves to make sure you believe them. And then there are the eyes, and they can betray all sorts of things. Like when asked a question you find it hard to answer, you may look down and away. That's called a tell. In archaeology, a tell is the remains of a village built in the same location for hundreds or thousands of years. Essentially human waste. To break that down a bit further, shit. It's their shit. Let's call it what it is. Their shit. All the shit they left when they were gone is now a clue, so we know they were there. There's a beautiful symmetry in that. An obvious mound of shit that sticks out of the ground is not unlike a human tell, which is a change in demeanor or behavior that sticks out like a sore thumb when you lie to cover your shit. The more you try to be aware of it, the harder it is to not do it, whatever your it is. It isn't an exact science. I don't know that it's science at all. Basically, it's what your gut tells you when you're looking at the person that's telling you what they're telling you, and you know they are full of shit.
Bob, you know, it's no doubt in my mind that this morning your wife set fire to your house. You know, there's no doubt in my mind. You did, you know, you went out that morning, took care of the garbage, you come back home, and your wife is trying to burn your house down. I know that. You know, I've got no reason to doubt that at all. And I think it's quite possible that maybe your wife got the pistol out and she was bizarre and she's acting really out of it. And I think you had a fight with her. And I think you had to fight about the gun. And she's trying to burn the house down. And I can understand, this is your pride and joy. I mean, this is what you got in life. This is your home.
No, it's not true.
You know?
I got my mother's house is down there in Grand Rapids.
Okay, but so your mother's house, but you don't, you know, you're kind of,
Yeah.
if you're like me, we're getting kind of old to move back with mom, you know?
No, it's,
But-
hey, I would have gone back to Florida.
Well,
You know, if,
you know, you told me earlier that you'd put a lot of time and effort in that cottage, and it shows it, because you know, you got a nice place
okay,
there.
the reason for that, for doing that, is because it got down to 4 degrees last winter, one day, and it got cold and we couldn't heat it. And this was the reason, first I was just gonna put sheeting up on it. And one thing led to another. We got the stuff so cheap and everything, and we got less than $300 in that whole damn thing. So, I mean, why not do it? And I had the time. So, there's, you know, it's sure it's a nice place. I like it. Yeah. And she did too. We used to sit for hours and watch little white-eared the squirrels come up in patches and things like this, and the kitty enjoyed it. So we both enjoyed it immensely.
Well, Bob, after you were fighting the fire,
Yeah.
and you had to fight with your wife,
Yeah.
and she sat down on a stool, did you take that gun and did you shoot your wife?
No. No, I did not.
You did not shoot your wife.
No, I didn't. It's like I said, you're...
I could understand you if you know, if you were to tell me that's not what happened, you don't understand, this is what took place, I could understand it, because number one, you're fighting a fire, you know, and she's trying to burn the place down. You've had a heck of a fight with her.
No, the fire was pretty much under control. I wasn't too much worried.
Yeah, but
about
it flared back up, you know.
It did once.
It did once
but,
before you got it, and then you turned.
No,
she
I
ended up
wasn't
getting
mad
shot.
enough. No, I wouldn't have done that. No way in hell.
You would not have shot your wife in
No.
those circumstances?
No.
Even when you're...
No. No way. No way in hell would I ever done that.
Norma Bailey married Robert Elton Waldron on May 22, 1985, in Miami, Florida. They met on a beach, according to a woman named Barbara, who dated Waldron for a time, before their interactions became volatile. Waldron was a maintenance man at a complex called Eagle's Nest, where he would eventually be fired for performance issues. Doesn't seem like he really liked to work. Norma was a widow, having been married to Sylvester Bailey for many years before his death in 1984. He was 27 years her senior, and by all accounts, they had a good marriage. According to the witness statement of the Borshoffs, an older couple who were friends with her and Sylvester in Miami, and also with Waldron, quote, Norma missed Cy very, very bad. It's hard to say what drew her to someone described as quiet and moody and a loner. Maybe when you hear him speak at length, that'll become clear. Or maybe, like me, you'll just have more questions. Norma Bailey would marry Waldron about a year after the death of Sylvester Bailey. It was her third marriage and his fifth. In October of 1986, they moved to a small cottage on a lake in Michigan, Sylvan Lake. It was a big change for the self-sufficient woman who'd worked the previous 10 years in Miami as property manager for a real estate company, her duties to include bookkeeping, secretarial, and appointment management. In Michigan, she worked for a time at a veterinarian's office, also a small grocery store and a floral shop. They were always part-time jobs. She was described as cheerful, the type of employee to go the extra mile to help someone, but she shared with a few people that she wished Waldron would show some interest in getting some regular paying work. And she missed Miami, a completely different climate and lifestyle than that of a small town. Then there was her mother-in-law, Alice. Let's just say it doesn't appear they became fast friends. There's a note in one of the police reports about how her mother-in-law had cursed her out, and she told Waldron if it happened again she was leaving. There are multiple witness accounts of Norma saying things like she wasn't allowed to rearrange the furniture in the cottage because the mother-in-law wouldn't allow it. This cottage was described as a single-floor wood-frame dwelling, about 14 feet wide by 26 feet long. It was on a 2-track road facing the lake, and just across the road from the house was where Mr. Waldron parked his pickup truck, next to a small metal storage shed at the lake's edge. There was also a small dock that extended into the water from that area. Other houses and docks dotted the circumference of the lake, which was a peaceful area nestled in the woods. Not all the houses had residents year-round. Some people liked to escape the cold Michigan winters. The cottage had a small 7-foot-wide porch on the front, occupied by 2 chairs, perfect for sitting with your morning coffee and looking at the tiny lake that fronted the property. A set of sliding glass doors was the entrance to the home, and it led into a tiny space that was basically a single room, bathroom, and living/kitchen area. Quaint and comfortable, but absolutely not much space if you wanted or needed to get away from the overbearing mother-in-law who felt comfortable yelling at you, not to mention the husband that wouldn't intervene. It appears that whatever Norma saw in Waldron when they were in Miami disappeared once they crossed the Michigan state line. She said he changed. Robert Elton Waldron had a history with women that isn't generally what you'd describe as healthy. That includes his mother. There are multiple people who know him, including family members, who believe he had something to do with his mother's death. At the very least, they believe he left her alone often and for too long. An incident report investigating Alice Waldron's death reads, "I was called into work to investigate the death of Alice Waldron. This request was made by Dr. Raymond Lang, Kent County Deputy Medical Examiner, based on a report of the relatives' suspicions of the victim's son, Robert Elton Waldron." Dr. Lang may have thought it a good idea to check into it a little more, because by the time Alice died in 1987, he knew that the death of Robert Waldron's wife, Norma, which occurred 10 years earlier, was believed to be a homicide by the Michigan State Police. I guess when you've been to the crime scene of a woman who allegedly shot herself in the head, and you know the police don't think that's how it happened, and then 10 years later the mother of the guy the police think did it suddenly dies, you should probably have someone take a quick look, just to make sure. When the autopsy was performed at Blodgett Hospital by Dr. Stephen Cole, a forensic pathologist, the results indicated that Alice Waldron had died as the result of congestive heart failure, hypertension, and severe arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease. There was no foul play noted. But what does it say about you as a person that multiple people think you could have killed your own mother? Robert Elton Waldron. Some called him Bob. Some called him Elton or Eldie. I'm going to call him Waldron from here on out. If you map out a timeline of his past relationships with females, which I had to do in order to sort everything out, it reads like a remake of Groundhog Day directed by David Lynch. It's dark and frightening, and you could wallpaper a small bathroom with the amount of police reports written with his name on them, if you combine that stack with the stack of divorce paperwork. As you read, a pattern emerges. You can predict the cycle of abuse each significant other after other after other will encounter once they've been together for a little while. He's rarely described in a way that sounds appealing, yet this guy managed to woo woman after woman into living with him, having sex with him, and marrying him. Some not all of the above, and some not necessarily in that order. Between 1951 and 1955, he fathered 3 children with 3 different women, 2 of which were given up for adoption at birth. He wasn't married to any of them at the time. He eventually married one of the women who gave her child up for adoption and forsook the one he was supposed to marry first. He ended up divorcing the woman he did marry after 3 or 4 years. She says he was abusive. It was a busy time for Waldron back then, what with all the impregnating and forsaking and abusing. By 1959, he'd met and married a woman named Kelly, with whom he had 2 children. They were together for 7 or 8 years. That would be his longest relationship. According to Kelly, he beat both her and the kids. By the early 1970s, he'd met and married a woman named Sharon, who had a young daughter of her own. They divorced in 1975, but that wouldn't be the end for them.
Wyoming-Michigan Police Department Incident Report, April 17, 1977. The complainant stated that she received a threatening phone call from her ex-husband, Robert Waldron. Mr. Waldron told the complainant that he does not want her to have other men over to her apartment. Mr. Waldron stated that he knew she had a male friend with her at the time and that she had better make him leave. Mr. Waldron then told her that he was on his way over and he had a shotgun with him. Complainant asked him to stay away from her and leave her alone. Mr. Waldron advised her that he was not going to stay away. He further stated, and I quote, "I am not going to scare him, I'm going to kill the son of a bitch." This in reference to her male friend. Mr. Waldron then advised Sharon to look at the headlight of her vehicle, which was parked in the lot of the apartment house. When she asked why she should look at it, Mr. Waldron said, "I smashed it." Complainant checked and found the right headlight of her vehicle smashed out. Mr. Waldron further stated that he was coming back to smash the vehicle of her male friend. Officers then went to speak with Mr. Waldron at his residence. Subject was very despondent, also threatened to take his own life. Stated that he wanted to get back with his ex-wife. Addendum, April 21, 1977. Warrant was issued by the city attorney and assistance was requested of Sharon to aid in the apprehension of the suspect. She phoned him and arranged to meet him at 36th and Clyde Park. This officer stopped the suspect on his side of the 800 block and proceeded with the arrest. Subject arraigned, pled guilty and was sentenced to 90 days incarceration. Second addendum, May 13, 1977. Complaint is reopened. Complainant phoned this officer and stated that on the evening of May 10, Mr. Waldron again came to her apartment and began beating on the door and yelling, threatening her because she refused to talk with him. He eventually left without causing any harm or damage. He was not invited to come over and was told by the complainant that he was not wanted around. Waldron had been released from Kent County Jail on May 3. On May 4, he was back at the complainant's apartment. He was again uninvited, but the complainant agreed to talk with him through the screen door. He again began yelling. Another resident came outside to see if someone was being injured due to the noise. He was again asked to leave. He shouted something at the complainant and left. The neighbor stated that Mr. Waldron has been observed driving through the parking lot several times since his release. Waldron had been ordered by the judge to have no contact with her for 2 years.
Waldron served 76 days of a 90-day sentence in the Kent County Jail. He was released and then, the very next day, he went to Sharon's house. He had been ordered by the judge to have no contact with her for 2 years. He was hauled back into court where Sharon told the judge that she'd allowed him in to try and talk sense into him, but thereafter he began entering her home without her permission. The judge ordered the bench warrant held in abeyance, again ordered him to stay away from her, but he was released with no further action by the court. You get a sense that things shifted once the female says to the judge, "Well, yeah, I tried to play nice and I let him in, so he'd stop being a psycho, and look what happened." This is not uncommon in women who are abused and stalked, and nothing seems to stop it. They try to pacify, try to make nice, try to do anything to keep the person from becoming violent, because clearly the law can't always help you. With the newest legal issues hanging over his head, it's not hard to see why Waldron decided to head to Florida and put some space between himself and another possible incarceration. But Florida would prove to be no less problematic for him. You know that phrase you hear in real estate, location, location, location? Well, in life you can change locations, and it might change the view, but it won't change who you are. Waldron took with him all his anger and all his faults, in addition to his ability to woo the women. Next there was Eve, who, like Sharon back in Michigan, had fled as soon as she could.
Collier County Sheriff's Department Incident Report. Reporter advises that his wife of 1 year, Eve Waldron, has disappeared and he hasn't heard from her in a week. They have been separated for a month and just got back together. It's thought that she left on her own. She was working at Lake Employment but has resigned as of last week. She also took some clothes, but not all. As of this time, there is not enough for a full bolo on missing person.
And then there was Barbara.
Collier County Sheriff's Department Incident Report. Mr. Robert Waldron, employed at the Eagle's Nest on Marco Island, did on numerous occasions verbally threaten to take my life by means of a .357 Magnum pistol, physically shown to me at my home, in front of my parents as witnesses. He also threatened to kick my ass, and blow my brains out, and run me down in the street like a dog. He further stated that he would blow me apart when I wasn't expecting it. Later that day, he followed Barbara and I around Marco, west on Jamaica Court and Samoa, north on Bald Eagle Drive, to the sheriff's substation, where he broke off pursuit. He tried to use his vehicle as a lethal weapon to ram and force mine off the road. He stated that he was watching us, following us, and citing his .357 Magnum. He said he would, and I quote, "kill you both, and her daughter, you fat, motherfucking, son of a bitch."
Their relationship ended the same as it had with Kelly and Sharon and Eve, with a man who could not take "leave me the hell alone" for an answer. There was always stalking, there were always threats that involved blowing someone's brains out. There were many, many red flags about how dangerous the man could be. But red flags don't necessarily get woven together to make a nice soft quilt that keeps everyone safe and warm. A report here, a couple weeks in jail there, another week in another state. None of that gets woven together into a concrete preventative. Well, not until you actually do blow someone's brains out. Then all the reports suddenly come together real quick. The following clip is the full, unedited recording of his first interview, less than 2 hours after the shooting. You will hear brief blank spots where names of witnesses have been redacted.
This will be a tape statement from Mr. Robert Elton Waldron at 4649 Sylvan Lake Drive, Newaygo, on complaint number 65-1110 of 87, file class 9900-1. The statement is being taken, Squad Room, State Police Post, Newaygo, Saturday, June 13th at 8:25 a.m. Before taking the statement from Mr. Waldron, I, Trooper James Reed, will administer pre-interview advice of rights from Department of State Police Miranda card. Mr. Waldron, you have the right to remain silent. If you choose to waive your right to remain silent, anything you say and any answers you give will be used against you in court. You have a right to talk to an attorney or other person of your choice. If you want an attorney but cannot afford one, an attorney will be appointed. If you give up your right to remain silent and your right to an attorney at any time during the questioning that you decide you want an attorney, the questioning will stop until you have talked with one. If you give up your right to remain silent at any time you say that you don't want to answer any more questions, the questioning will stop. Mr. Waldron, do you understand what I've just told you?
Yes, I do.
Do you want an attorney?
I don't think it's necessary right now.
Do you wish to waive or give up your right to remain silent?
I do.
Okay, Mr. Waldron, this involves the incident that took place approximately 7 a.m. This morning. Using your own words, do you want to narrate through the incident before and during and any other thing you feel is pertinent to this case?
Yes, I will. I got up this morning, it was 6:07. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. My wife and I had been kind of arguing last night and stuff like this. I didn't think too much about the situation as it was. The kitty had been into the trash, so I took the trash, drank half a cup of coffee after it was made, and took the trash out and put it in the truck and took it to the container up on 37. And because it was starting to smell, we don't have a garbage can at the house. And was going to go fishing and came back, parked my truck down in the parking lot by the lake, and walked into the shed and noticed the shed door was open. My boat gas can, the 5-gallon mix can, the top was off. The gas was gone out of that. The 1-gallon can that I carry in the boat was gone. And the tops were strewn on the floor in the shed. I thought at that time that somebody had come in and taken my gas. And I had noticed when I come in that the drapes were re-pulled on the cottage. Was trying to figure out, I was looking on the ground to see if there was footprints or whatever, trying to figure out what happened to the gas. And I heard Norma, my wife, scream from the cottage. Well, I didn't really think too much about the first scream because it was kind of just a little one. And I was looking, she had my attention then, and I was looking up there, and the second time she screamed, she pulled the drapes back and had the door open, the sliding door open, and I could see flames in the bedroom or the back of the cottage.
Mr. Waldron, where were you at this time when you first heard the scream?
I was down by my shed, down by where the truck was parked, just outside the shed there.
Were you at the shed or the fishing dock? Or?
No, I wasn't down at the dock. I was still at the shed trying to figure out what happened to the gas. And at that time, I run yelling at her. I don't know what I said now. It probably wasn't too great. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. I grabbed the hose off the side of the porch and ran in the house. And the house was filled with smoke. The bedroom was on fire, and I didn't realize exactly what was going on at that time. But she was burning. Apparently, she had set the bedclothes on fire, not in the bed, but alongside of some papers and stuff. She'd poured gas on a bunch of papers and stuff that she was burning. And I don't know what all was going on, but things started getting pretty hectic right then. And so I thought I had the fire out, and I opened up the windows, and then I saw her with a gun, the revolver, taken from the drawer on the desk. And I ran back to get that, and we wrestled with the gun, and all at once the fire broke back out in the bedroom again. I ran back up in the bedroom to get the fire out, and Norma at that time had proceeded outside, fired the gun once, and came back in and pointed it at me, and then says, "I can't live like this," or something to this effect. And I was busy with the fire at that time, and the next shot I heard was inside, and she fell. And that's where they found her and all the other stuff, and that's the way it went. I then proceeded to the phone and called, checked her first, and she had definitely had shot herself as far as I could tell. It was in the head someplace. There's blood all over. I called across the cove at the lake and woke him up, and I don't know what time it was. I have no idea what time it was at that time or anything. And then I called, he called the 911 number or whatever it is, and I called it, and the ambulances came, and eventually they got there, and then the officer got there, and they took Norma to Gerber, and I am up here now at the state police post giving my account of what happened. So.
Okay, Mr. Waldron, how many years have you been married to Norma Waldron, your wife?
A little over 2 years. 2 years and a couple of 3 days.
Okay, have you been having marital problems, or has she been upset about anything?
Well, we'd moved up from Miami would have been a year in October, and she's been used to having quite a bit of money. She likes to spend money, and things haven't worked out exactly too great for us up here as far as being able to work, getting jobs and stuff like that. And she's been doing what she could do. She's been working at Fairview Floral and Fremont. She'd worked at Dr. Clark's office in Fremont, the veterinarian, and she'd worked at Annie's Midway station up there on 37 part-time. These mostly were part-time jobs. And I worked at Gerber under Manpower for a while last winter, but she seemed to be happy and liked the animals and stuff like that, but she just, I don't know, I just didn't, she's a very quick-tempered person. And she's been having trouble sleeping the last couple of 3 days. I've been working real hard on the cottage, putting new siding on it, so I'm redoing the porch and stuff like that, because I'm trying to, last winter it was pretty cold there, it wasn't insulated or anything, so we insulated it this year.
Is a neighbor
He's he's a neighbor of mine, up the lake. He's a longtime friend. We've been friends since back in the 40s.
Who owns the gun?
It was registered to my stepdad. I originally bought it in Fort Myers, Florida, and I had given it to my stepdad, who was deceased, and this is one of the reasons for back up here, is because I got the cottage back, and I came back up to be with my mother, closer to her. And this happened 13 days after we were married, so it'll be coming up that his death was just around the corner, too.
Okay, is there anything else that you want to add or you feel is important to your statement on this tape?
Well, I'm just sorry as hell it happened. I think maybe I could have prevented it if I feel like if I'd let the fire go and I hit Norma trying to get the gun away from her before, and just earlier in this instant, and I think maybe if I feel kind of bad about not, maybe if I'd have wrestled with her and let the fire go, I could have at least saved her. But hey, what can I do about that now?
Okay, just for the record, Mr. Waldron, would you state your full name, your date of birth, and your address, please?
Yeah, it's Robert Elton Waldron. The date of birth is 10/25/1931, and I live residing now at 4649 Sylvan Lake Drive, Newaygo, Michigan. And the zip up there is 49337.
Okay, Mr. Waldron, I want to thank you very much for your statement, and the statement is concluded at 8:35 a.m.
Okay.
Norma Waldron's life ended in a way that almost anyone could have predicted, if they had all the reports in front of them that I do, and known ahead of time that her path would eventually cross with that of Robert Elton Waldron. We're told that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. This story screams that truth from pages and pages of police reports written over a span of decades. But it's how these stories never got woven together and captured in any way that could have prevented the outcome. That's what interests me. I guess that's what bothers me. How it was all there in bits and pieces for anyone to gather up and collect and hand over to her the day she met him. A love note from the future. That's what it would have been. Norma was killed, and no one was ever held to account for her death, but that's not because nobody made the effort. There was an investigation. There were interrogations. Evidence was retrieved from a crime scene and sent to a lab, and then tested with the technology available in 1987. And even that might have been enough, if the stars had aligned differently, if another type of ammunition had been used, and any number of things, I suppose, had gone another way. The thing is, everyone did their job. It was all done the way it was supposed to be done, and it still wasn't enough. Sometimes there just isn't enough. I guess that's why we're here. I don't like that answer. When the first officer arrived on scene, there were already 2 ambulances parked in front of the residence. Both White Cloud and Fremont had been dispatched because the initial call was about a shooting, possible attempted suicide, though it wasn't clear whether the victim was still alive. The first responding officer would encounter the husband of the victim standing in the front yard with a neighbor. He wouldn't need to enter the home to see what was happening. The EMTs were just inside the sliding glass doors, attending to Norma, cutting off her shirt, starting an IV, and preparing her for the trip to Gerber Memorial Hospital. The shooting had apparently occurred just inside around 7 a.m. EMTs report having found her seated upon a low stool, slumped back against the glass door, with a revolver on the floor directly beneath her left hand. A box of ammunition sat just in front of the stool. The first officer also noted a cardboard box on the front porch that contained miscellaneous papers which appeared to be partially burned. Next to the box was a 1-gallon red gas can. A garden hose connected to an outside faucet was strung through the glass doors and into the only bedroom at the rear of the home. He noted that the residence smelled of smoke, and the floor, as well as some of the contents of the bedroom, were saturated with water. At that time, Waldron told the officer that he had brought the box and gas can to the front porch to prevent a flare-up. The officer noted that there had been a small fire in the bedroom and bedding that had been burned, as well as a mattress cover. On the bedside rug, he could see the outline where the gas can and box had been, because the rest of the rug around it was saturated with water. The bedroom carpet was also singed and melted at a spot next to the bed at the edge of the rug. Mr. Waldron gave the officer a brief statement, and after Norma had been removed to be transported to the hospital, he went to the local police post to give a recorded statement. But when Waldron had been interviewed at the scene, he had provided some information that wasn't entirely consistent with the information in his first recorded statement. For example, at the scene, speaking for the first time about what had happened, he stated that his wife had assisted him for a few seconds to put out the fire, and she said she was sorry. He also said that when the fire rekindled itself in the bedroom, he didn't know whether to continue trying to get the gun away from her or make another attempt to put out the fire. He said he ultimately decided to put the fire out and re-entered the bedroom. The first responder also learned from Waldron that when his stepfather had died, he decided to move back to Florida to live in the cabin owned by his mother. He said Norma had not been very happy living there and that he thought she missed Miami. He said they had not been getting along very well recently. He told the officer at the scene that he did not feel a lot of sympathy for his wife and that he was angry at her for trying to burn down the cottage and for pointing a gun at him. Almost as an aside, he did state that he felt bad for the incident happening at all. The Newaygo County prosecutor was contacted at 11:35 a.m., only a few hours after the first responders arrived on scene. In reviewing an X-ray of the victim's gunshot, there was some question as to the placement of the point of entry and the path of the projectile. Police felt the shooting may not have been self-inflicted. The wound was a contact wound to the left of the center of the forehead, just slightly to the left, and the outline of the barrel was partially discernible on the skin. What added to the concern about this finding was that the weapon was a long-barreled blue steel revolver. The barrel length was 5 inches long. So, if you make your hand into the shape of a gun and hold your fingertip 5 inches from the surface of your forehead and try to pretend shoot yourself, you get a sense of how awkward that could be from the perspective of someone self-inflicting it, if you understand that the bullet has to go in with little to no deviation either from left to right or up and down. It went straight in. While doing your little experiment with the weapon that has the 5-inch barrel, you can also entertain the possibility, as I did, that she could have held it backwards and facing herself, like someone who has absolutely no experience with guns, and depressed the trigger with her thumb or thumbs. But if she had done that, while standing, as Waldron alleges, you would not expect the gun to fall to her left, nor for her to fall backward onto a low stool in a seated position, slumped back against the glass door. What you would expect is she would crumple to the floor where she stood. Immediately after Detective Miller realized the possibility existed of a homicide, he called the post to request a trooper head back to the residence and attempt to prevent any alteration of the scene. Up to that point, the scene had been treated as a suicide. When the first responder returned, he encountered 2 more people. Waldron's mother and his 26-year-old son had come from Grand Rapids. Google Maps tells me that is about an hour drive door to door. Mr. Waldron said that he had called them at approximately 9:30 a.m. The acting medical examiner arrived and examined the scene to determine the location of the victim at the time the injury was received. Items from the scene were then confiscated, some of which had been moved by Mr. Waldron, who admitted to being involved in the cleaning of the home, having done so after he was released in the morning after his first 10-minute interview. Mr. Waldron had attempted to clean up the blood spills, fire damage, and admitted to washing the dishes, all of which he did while his wife was still clinging to life at the hospital. He did not leave the police post after that short interview ended at 8:35 and rush up to the hospital where his wife was being treated. He drove the 10 to 15 minutes back home, started cleaning up, and made a bunch of phone calls. Items removed from the scene were an orange curtain drape with stains on it in the lower right corner, a shirt from the bedroom, the throw rug from the room, which they found lying over a tree stump outside, and a section of rug from the bedroom. They also found a plastic drawstring garbage bag outside a side door of the residence and seized that. The contents of that bag were a fitted bedsheet with possible bloodstains, a cotton shirt rag that was burnt and smelled of gasoline, 2 terry cloth towels with burnt holes and stains, a bedsheet with a burn mark, another shirt, a blood-stained gauze bandage, and 4 pieces of burned cardboard with a Miami address listed as belonging to the Borshoffs. The rest of the burnt box was retrieved from a trash burner at the rear of the residence. They also recovered personal papers and folders of the Waldrons that smelled of smoke and gasoline from a metal storage cabinet outside on the front porch. In addition, they retrieved a plastic carton that contained 4 boxes of .22 caliber high-velocity Winchester Western ammo and loose shells from a drawer in the desk that the TV sat on top of, as well as a holster. There was also a blank notepad that they would later have checked to see if any pages were missing or the possible vestiges of a suicide note that she could have written. After the scene was assessed and he had taken pictures, Detective Miller asked Mr. Waldron to come back to the police post with him to be interviewed for the 2nd time that day. Also present at that time was the Newaygo County prosecutor. Police interviewed a neighbor who had been fishing out on his own dock that morning at around 6:50 a.m. and observed Waldron standing on his dock. At that time, he heard a woman screaming from the Waldron residence and saw Mr. Waldron run from the dock toward his house. The screaming continued in 2 or 3 second intervals, and he heard Waldron scream, "Get out of there, you bastard." He then observed Waldron enter the house. Shortly thereafter, he observed him on the west side of the house. He couldn't tell what he was doing outside. He then saw him go back into the house. Several minutes later, he heard 2 shots. He said there was possibly a 30-second interval between them. He did not observe anyone outside during that time. He then left and went back home to tell his wife. A few minutes later, he saw Mr. Waldron and the neighbor who had been called outside on the lawn. He noted that he never observed any evidence of a fire. Of the details given by the EMTs, one described Norma's body as being seated upon a low stool near the sliding glass door, laid back against it. He said the long-barreled blue steel revolver was on the floor directly beneath Norma's hand, about 6 inches from the stool. He was not aware of a fire having occurred within the home, although he did recall a burnt box or two that smelled like smoke on the front porch. He did not recall any smell of gasoline. Another EMT confirmed the location of the gun. His report added that they had cut her shirt off. He noted that she was not wearing a bra, and she had been dressed in panties, blue jeans, and a shirt when they arrived. He added that he had no idea a fire had occurred in the home and he did not smell any smoke. A third EMT said that the interior of the home was somewhat dark and that they had to use flashlights to start an IV. He also stated that the thing about the injury that seemed unusual to him was that the wound was very high on the forehead. Another person that had some concerns was the neighbor Waldron had phoned that morning, the one who made the first call to 911. After briefly speaking to an officer on the scene, and then thinking more about it, he contacted the detective with his concerns. The following unedited interview was done with this neighbor in October, a few months later, when he was recontacted by Michigan State Police to go over his statement again. You will hear brief blank spots where names of witnesses have been redacted.
Why don't you just narrate the events up again and what took place that date as you recall it? And in particular, the type of conversation, or if you can recall, the words of the conversation Mr. Waldron used.
Well, he called me. I was just getting up. I had heard that shot, what I thought was one shot, but that's all I heard. And he, I was just getting up, just putting my pants on, and the phone rang. And he said, "This is Elton. Get over here right away. Norma tried to burn the house down and tried to commit suicide." So I put my pants on and run right over there. Well, when I got over there, he was outside. He was down between the house and the road. And I don't remember if I walked right up to the house right then or not, but I talked to him a minute, and he was looking for his cat. He said that she told him she put the cat in the car, so he went down and took the cat out of the car and put it in the truck.
So the cat was in the car then?
The cat was in the car. I asked him, as I remember, if she was alive, and we walked up to the house then, and I went up on the porch. I didn't go in, but I went on the porch, and the door was open. I looked in the door, and she was sitting or laying up against that sliding door, kind of with her hands out like that. And she was alive yet. I could hear her breathing. She was in bad shape, but that's not my bag, so I kind of walked away. But then he went inside, and he came out and he brought a box out and threw that on the porch. And then he brought some bedding out off the bed, and he threw that on the porch. And then we were outside there talking, and well, I says to him, "Why don't you call that ambulance again?" Because we didn't hear no siren or anything. So he called that ambulance back, and about that time we could hear the siren coming. Well, then he's walking around down there in the yard, and he's just kicking dirt and walking, and and goddamning her this and goddamn her that. And God, I said, Elton, for crying out loud, that woman is laying in there dying. Well, then he walked away, and then pretty soon he come back up there and he says, well, if I feel so cold, if I act so cold about this, he says, it's just because, he said, the last damn thing I own, and she's trying to burn me out. Well, then about that time, that ambulance came in. And what struck me so odd then is that he never went near those people from the ambulance. He never, in fact, they, rushed right in and took her off that stool down on the floor and put that life support stuff on her, whatever they, did. And then they brought they were in there quite a little while. In the meantime, this state trooper came. And, but before the state trooper, before the ambulance even got there, when he explained to me how she shot herself, I asked him about the gun. I said, well, what the world, Ellie, did you have that gun loaded? Was the gun loaded in the house? He said no, that he had unloaded it because the kids were coming up or something, and he had unloaded it. And I said, well, how in the devil did Norma ever load that gun? Well, to begin with, he said that after she had set that fire, and he ran in the house. He said he was down in front there by the shed out on this side of the road, and he looked up there. She was screaming at him, and he looked up there, and he said it looked like the whole inside of the place was on fire. Well, that afterwards, it struck me funny because it didn't look to me like there was no smoke in there when I got up there first. But anyway, he said she got the gun, and he said, I looked around and she had that gun, and he said, I ran down there and I got that gun away from her. And I said, well, what'd you do with it? How'd she get the gun back then? And he said, well, I don't know. He said, that fire broke out, and he said, I think I threw the gun. It went under the Davenport or something. He said, I ran back up there and the fire broke back out, and I ran back up there and to put that fire out. In the meantime, she took the gun out on the porch and loaded it and shot it. And then he said she came back in the house and shot herself. So then this fella down here, he came there afterwards, and this is after the state trooper was there, and that of course that state trooper asked me, what I seen, and then he talked to this. Of course, Aldi was standing right there. Well, then I told him what he heard Aldi cussing her out, and
so Mr. Waldron was present during that conversation with the neighbor?
He was only standing 10 feet away or so.
Okay.
And there was 2 shots, he said, and they were like 10 to 20 seconds apart. Well, this was entirely different than what Aldi led me to believe, because he led me to believe that it would have had to been 3 minutes by the time he took that gun away from her the first time, and then she ran back out and loaded that gun and shot it. So then after the trooper left and after the ambulance left, I came back over here, and then he came over here. And I says, Ellie, aren't you going to go up to the hospital? Well, you want to go with me? I says, no, I don't really want to go with you. But I said, I would think that you'd want to go to the hospital. Well, I called my mom and her and his boy was going to come up, and he says, I ain't going up there. He said, I'll wait for them. So then we were talking about it again, and then he changed that deal on that gun, and he told me then that he couldn't get the gun away from her.
Did that strike you as being odd, or did it?
that really struck me as being odd because, well, in fact, I'm getting ahead of the story. When they brought that stretcher up there, the thing kept wanting to roll down the hill. They had it up against the porch. So I went up and took a hold of that stretcher and I held it there, held it up against the porch for them. And when they brought her out, it appeared to me like her nose was broke or something. Now, I could be mistaken on that, but it sure looked like it. Like she had a cut on her nose, and then she had a spot here on her arm, too, on her shoulder. And I asked him at the time if they fought. I said, would she fall down out of them stairs or something? Because there's cement steps, you know how they go up into that back room. And I thought maybe either he threw her out of there or she fell out of there. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, I fought with her for that gun. And he said, I don't know whether she did or not. Well, I said, yeah, it looked to me like her nose was broke. Well, then, when he came back over here and he really changed that story entirely, then he told me that fire, that she put the fire out. He said that when he got in there, she had took those bed clothes off the bed and stuck them in that box and put the fire out.
Let me go back. He did that or she did that?
She did that.
She did that.
Said she jerked the bedding off the bed and stuffed it in that box, and this was before he even got in the house with that hose. But he did soak it down because that box was wet and that bedding was wet when he brought them out and threw them on the porch. Well, then he left. After I told him I didn't really care to go to the hospital, he said, well, I'm going back over there, and his boy was coming. Well, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, because I had, the officer there had asked us if, we had any reason to believe what he told him, because we were standing there more or less when he told him too. And I guess no. But then when after I talked to him over here again, it was just so entirely different. And then I had to start thinking to myself, why in the world did he call me instead of dialing that 911 number? And so I just wanted to...
The state trooper who was also a neighbor lives across the lake here.
Right.
Okay.
Well, to come over. So I went over there and I talked to him for a few minutes, and he told me the best thing to do was to go down and talk to you. I think he might have called somebody at the post, and I went down.
Okay. Well, thinking back, you and I did talk at 13th of June at my office, and which you relayed to me that you had heard one shot, and that Bob had called you.
Yeah. At
that conversation, you felt there could have been a time lapse of 5 minutes from the time you heard that phone call to the time that the phone call, or when you heard a shot, back up, when you heard the shot, you're not a bed, for when Bob called you, you said at that time you felt it could have been 5 minutes. Are you still of the opinion that time period is about 5 minutes?
I would think, I would have to think it'd be in that vicinity, because
it's not the case.
I really wasn't awake yet. That shot, I heard it, but I wasn't totally awake. I was probably just about to get up.
It's not the case where you were getting up, you heard the shot, and while you're getting dressed, the phone rang, asking for help? No,
that shot was before I got up. I was still in bed when I heard the shot.
During our conversation that I had to be on the 13th, you did not mention that Bob Waldron was cussing at his wife outside the home.
No, I don't think I did at that time mention that. I think I did tell you that over the phone later.
There was several weeks later.
Right.
You and I had a conversation on the phone where you mentioned to me that, well, on that morning Bob was cussing at his wife, and I asked him, for God's sakes, she's dying.
Right.
I wasn't aware of his temperament until you told me that. Mm-hmm. And it's been perhaps a month ago you told me that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's different things that I probably didn't tell you at the time of the interview that, and that would definitely be one of them.
Is it because that you didn't think to tell me about it, or because I didn't ask the question?
Probably a little bit of both, and
Okay.
more of it, I probably didn't even think about that part of it at the time, you know, that
Okay.
the conversation that we had outside. We never went in the house in fact, I never did go in the house, totally inside the house.
Okay. Going back to where you walked up to the house and onto the porch, did you see any weapon at all in the house?
That's another thing that struck me odd afterwards, is because the gun was laying right directly under her left hand. And then he told me, well, afterwards in a conversation with him, I says to him, Aldy, I can't understand why you called me and instead of not calling that ambulance yourself.
What time frame did that conversation take place? The same day, the same morning, or a different day?
I think probably a different day.
A different day after the shooting?
After the shooting. And he said that the fire, he was afraid the fire would break out. He was afraid Norma would have come back to and grabbed that gun again. And I said, well, Ellie, if you were afraid Norma was going to grab that gun, why didn't you kick that gun out of there or do something different with it? And then he told me that he had took that gun. He had picked the gun up. So it struck me funny then is why in the world did he put that gun back down there by her hand? Why was that gun laying there? I mean, it would have seemed to me like the normal thing to do would give that gun a kick. And
this gun you saw, was this a long gun or a handgun?
No, it was a handgun.
Handgun. Had you ever seen that gun before?
Yes, I belonged to boy.
Okay. Bob's mother?
Yes.
Have you ever seen Norma fire that gun?
Never.
Have you ever known her to fire any gun?
I never knew her to fire a gun.
Do you have any personal knowledge of whether or not she's familiar with firearms?
Not personal knowledge other than that through talking to him, she never wanted any part of hunting or target practicing or anything like that. And I did in a conversation, and I'm sure that Eldie's mother was there that day. This was possibly the next day that we were over there, or a day or two later. It was when Norma was in Grand Rapids, and they had taken her in there for an autopsy. I was over there, and I asked Elton at the time if he had done anything about funeral arrangements. And he said no, and I said, well, Ellie, you just can't leave them hanging down there. You got to do something about the funeral arrangements. But at that time, we were talking about her loading the gun. And I said, I can't understand in the state of mind that she would have had to been in, that she could have loaded that gun. If she'd have had a handful of shells, and out here on the porch, there should have been shells laying all over the porch in order for her to get shells in that gun to load it. Well, then he started looking around. Well, maybe there is, he says. But there wasn't any.
Mm-hmm.
And he appeared to know or appeared to think positively that there was only 3 shells in the gun. That's what he told me.
Did you ever see any damage to a neighbor's cottage where a bullet may have struck a neighbor's cottage? And if so, who pointed that out to you?
LD pointed that out to me probably a couple of days later, or maybe, I wouldn't dare say exactly how much later, but just a few days after this had happened, he showed me that. In fact, a neighbor over here, Red Miller, and I fixed that, repaired it afterwards.
Okay, now, for the record, you repaired a hole in the siding?
We took that piece of siding out and put a new piece of siding in.
Okay. When you repaired that siding, just to avoid later confusion, was the bullet hole still there?
The bullet hole was still there. The piece was cut out the siding had been cut
The
out.
siding was cut out.
Yeah.
And the underlying insulation was gone?
It was gone, yes.
Okay, could you see an indentation or any kind of bolt hole on the other side?
I could just about see where the paint was bruised, but no hole. And that's another thing.
Okay, to explain that to you, I cut that siding out of there and I got the damaged siding. So what you repaired was siding that I had damaged, recovering what was underneath that hunk of siding.
Yes, we took that out and put a new piece of siding in there. I'm quite familiar with guns, and that porch is not more than 30 feet away, if it's that. And I can't believe that a gun shot from that porch directly into that house wouldn't have penetrated that wood. I find it
You mean
awful hard.
a shot coming at a 90-degree angle? Or, well, how do you mean that?
Well, that shot would have almost had to go straight at that house from the porch.
So you mean a 90-degree angle? I mean, straight at it?
Yes.
Straight at it. So the point of impact should have been, in your opinion, if I'm
To
understanding
begin
correctly,
with, it shouldn't have knocked that jagged hole in that siding, and that vinyl siding and that 1/4 inch of styrofoam should not have stopped a .22 bullet. I would have thought that bullet should have penetrated the wood. I've never, in my own mind, believed that bullet came from the porch, unless it was a damaged bullet when it was shot.
Okay. Did you discuss that with Bob at all?
Yes.
And what kind of conversation did you have with him about that?
I just told him that, and he really didn't say anything about it.
Okay.
I did look, and I'm sure that he looked with me to see if that bullet came through from his house somewhere, and I couldn't find any place where it did. But I never was satisfied with that that's where that bullet came from.
Okay. Well, as long as we got the recording going, is there anything else that
Yeah. As you probably know by now, that he's mad at me. I don't know totally what that is about, other than probably 6 weeks ago, probably 6 weeks ago, he was over here and he started discussing this again. His main thing was that the investigation was still going on. He told me that he had called Florida, was thinking about going down to Florida, and that they had told him that there'd been an investigation down there too. And we were talking about this, kind of hashing the thing over again. And this time when he was talking about it, he said, first thing he said to me, he says, if something like this had ever happened again, or he says, there's things I would have done different. He said, first thing I'd have done is got that gun away from her, and the second thing he says I'd have called the ambulance myself. And I said, well, Aldi, that's probably why this investigation is still going on, because every time you tell me a story, you tell it different. And the story that I would consider should have been the one that was right was the first one you told me 5 or 6 minutes after I got there. And because he told me this particular day again, he said she had a death lock on that gun. He says, I couldn't get that gun out of her hands. He said, I had her right down on the floor. And he said, I might have even kicked her. He said, I know I hit her. I tried to knock her out, because he said, I tried to get that gun away from her, and I could not get that gun out of her hands. So that was a totally different story than what he had told me before.
you say different in the fact that the first story was that he got the gun from her?
The first story he told me that he got the gun, and he indicated to me at the time that when he got the gun the first time, it wasn't even loaded. That she got the gun after that and went out and loaded it. Now that's the way that I took the story the first time he told me.
Okay.
And I asked him again at this time why he, if he was scared that fire was going to break out, or that she was going to come to, that he put that gun back. I says, you told me you picked that gun up I said, why in the world did you put it back right by her hand?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he didn't know why he did that.
Did he ever tell you or make any representation where she got shot?
When I first got there, I asked him before I went up and looked, and he said, right there.
You know, you're pointing at me with your hand and finger. You know,
At the center of her forehead is what he...
now, did he point, or did he just say it was the center of the forehead?
No, he pointed with his hand.
And he pointed to the center of her forehead.
Mm-hmm. And that, you know, that's when I first got there, and I said, well, how bad is she? And he says, well, she's bad, but she's still alive. Well, then there's another thing that I should add to that, too, because in the conversation, he said she was still alive, and I think probably that's about when I walked up there and looked in there, and she was, and I could tell then that she wasn't going to make it. I mean, she was bad. And that's also the time when I asked him to dial that 911 number, because he was standing. He had brought this stuff out on the porch, and he went back in, and he was standing right there by the phone was right there by the door. And he did. But then he also says to me, if she makes it, she's sure going to have one fucked up face. And I thought, Jesus, you know, I don't even remember what I said to him then. I'm sure I walked away then, because that's about that's when he came back outside. It's kind of hard to explain, because he was walking around and I was walking around, and we were waiting for the ambulance, and that's when he was kicking the dirt and cussing her out, and I really don't even remember the exact words he said, but he was calling her a bitch and this and that.
Okay. Going back prior to the day of the shooting, Bob Waldron calling his wife a bitch and swearing at her. Was this unusual for him to refer to his wife in a derogatory sense?
Yeah, I don't think that I ever heard him talk that way about her before that, but he always indicated that he could do better without her. In fact, he had said that right out, that if she wasn't there, he says, he could live off the land and live up here cheap.
Next on Down and Away.
He told me part of what he's told the police. He told me that Norma committed suicide in front of him, and that the gun and the bullets were in two different places, so he didn't know how it all happened. He said he went outside to go fishing, and he was out at the shed and looked back up to the house, which I'd never been there, but it seemed that there was a pretty big window. And he said she was standing in front of the window, and he could see fire behind her. And he ran into the house to put the fire out, and he turned back around, and she shot herself in the head in front of him. For me, personally, he was just like some guy that I found out happened to be my father. I never felt father from him. He was just some guy that I would talk to occasionally, see what was going on in his life, him and mine. And like I said, never anything abusive or mean until one time. And that was when he said to me, I want to move back to Florida, because he was in Michigan at the time. I want to move back to Florida, but I can't. I wish my mother would die, because I can't move back to Florida until she dies. And that didn't set well with me at all. And I stopped talking to him, I think, for probably about 2 years at that point. How do I describe him? Mm-hmm. Very laid back. Very laid back, soft-spoken, giggly,
that description is actually perfectly fits the description in the police interrogation audio that we have. Very laid back, giggly, to the point that it was a little disturbing to me because...
Disturbing, exactly.
Yeah, that audio occurred that day of the murder, not hours later, and he was giggling.
Yeah, like 2 hours or something. Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, the audio tape for myself and for others that have heard it are like, wow, his wife just committed suicide 2 hours before that? He sure didn't sound like it. I would be a nervous wreck, you know?
Yeah.
And he was just way too laid back.